technology is ever evolving. You know, we all carry it around in our pockets now. Gone are the days where we had a separate computer that was rigged up at home, and then a sat nav that you put in your car, and a camera that you used to carry around or forget with you, pictures and get them developed. And then you had a diary in your pocket. You know, all of these things now are coming in a compact mobile phone, in a smartphone. People are carrying massive amounts of technology around in their pockets and bags all of the time, and children and young people are as well. And the use of the internet, the use of these technologies, different apps and websites, and some of the common ones here, some of the popular ones that you may be familiar with: Facebook, we've got TikTok, some of you may have heard of, Snapchat. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of other websites and apps that children, young people and adults use regularly. These are just some of the popular ones. But the use of the internet is more common than ever before. And for some of us that are a bit older, for some of us adults, it can still be a little bit alien to us because it's not something that we've grown up with. But we've got to put ourselves into the mindset of young people where this is all they've known. Okay, it's part and parcel of their daily lives. Now, obviously, throughout the course of this session, we're going to focus on safeguarding issues. We're going to be talking about some of the risks, some of the problems, some of the difficulties that can be encountered when using these modern technologies. But I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that it is a fantastic resource. Okay, the internet and these modern technologies are absolutely fantastic developments, and there are real benefits to them. So you might want to just go into that chat box and just jot in there, just pop in the chat box some of the benefits to the internet, some of the benefits to modern technology. What are some of the really good things? Just so we don't lose sight of that whilst I'm talking through the next hour and a quarter, because I think it's really easy to lose sight of the benefits. And often when I do internet safety training for parents or carers, foster carers, professionals, people want to race home and remove all of the computers from their house, take mobile phones off of children, because we worry about those risks and problems. But that's just the emphasis we're putting on today's session. A majority of people will use the internet problem-free. Okay. But there are challenges, and the role of technology as a facilitator of abuse and exploitation, and the additional complexities in the impact, need to be accounted for in our practice, in our guidelines and policies. So when we are safeguarding children, we need to be thinking about online as well as offline concerns. We need to think about the ease of access. And I would say that's ease of access for the young person. So how easy it is for them to access the internet, access certain sites at certain times of the day, but also ease of access for perpetrators, for people who are technically capable, for perpetrators who want to groom, exploit, harm children. They are technically capable. The internet provides them with a huge opportunity to make contact. Online activity controls the young person's nighttime space as well. Not just nighttime, things can happen in the daytime. I'm always saying this in my work, child exploitation doesn't just happen in the evenings, things can happen in the daytime. But what we mean by this is it's very difficult for a young person to step away from this. You know, it's very difficult for them to escape, because the internet can be very addictive. Games and things and social media can be very addictive. So young people are using that late into the evenings, late into their nights. It's disrupting their sleep pattern. But also, if they are encountering any difficulties like abuse, exploitation or bullying, that can stay with them throughout the day. You know, for 24 hours, 7 days a week, it's very difficult for them to escape from that. Images and conversations, particularly those of a sexual nature, indecent images of children. There's the concern around the sharing of those images, but also the blackmail and the threats that can be used. So it's very difficult for a young person to step away. And permanence. We always talk about the fact that once something's on the internet, it's permanent. You know, it can't be deleted. It's there. It can be hidden to an extent, but it can never be removed. And I don't think young people really grasp how permanent some of these things are. And I don't think I really grasped it completely until I was at a conference a couple of years ago with the Internet Watch Foundation, the IWF, who are a big organisation who work on all things internet safety. And they were telling us a story about a young person who had been abused online. She had been abused, images had been taken of the abuse, they were shared online. The IWF launched a massive investigation to both identify this young person and safeguard her, but also to identify the perpetrators and to prosecute them. And they had a great success. She was identified and safeguarded. A number of perpetrators were prosecuted. However, what they said at this conference was that 6 years later, they would still, and the IWF's job is to look through, to scrutinise different websites and chat rooms and look through people's computers that have been arrested and investigate individuals. And 6 years after they had safeguarded this young person, they were still on a daily basis finding images of her online on these different chat rooms and groups and on people's computers. So, and they weren't recent, they were images from 6 years previously. So despite a really successful campaign to safeguard this young person and prosecute offenders, those images were so widely distributed, they were still emerging 6 years later. That really hit home to me when I think about permanence. You know, and we ask young people to think about what they're putting online. Would they want it to be out there forever? And I don't think they really take note of what that means. So it links in with that loss of control of images. You know, once an image is posted online or sent electronically to somebody else, that young person has lost control of that image. They have no say. And professionals have limited control, limited things. We need to act really early to regain control of those images. But everything nowadays is instant. And I always think about young people and their limited consequential thinking. Yeah. That they can take a picture, post it online, it can be shared with hundreds of people within a split second. Yeah, really, really quick. So it's very easy for us to have that loss of control of images. And in the example that I just gave you of that girl, that re-victimization happens with the blackmailing as well, with the threats, with the fear, with the loss of the images, the fact that it is permanent, that young people are just being re-victimized constantly. There was another big case of a young girl, and it's not always girls. I know I've given a couple of examples now of females. It's not just girls, but I'm just thinking of a particular example of a young girl who had shared some images with somebody online. She thought it was a young male that she was chatting to, that she fancied, and she'd had some quite sexualized conversations. She'd sent some images. Turns out she had been trolled by some other young people at school. So she had been tricked into sending images. They were then circulated around the school, which then got circulated outside of the school in the local area. It got to the point where it was so distressing that her and her family ended up moving out of the area. They moved out of the area, different parts of the country, started at a new school, it took 6 months before those images re-emerged and that people in her new school became aware of them. And tragically, she ended up taking her own life because she just felt that she couldn't get away from that. She was being re-victimized constantly. As I said, hold on to the thought about the benefits of the internet, because I know we're talking about some quite difficult things here. But as I said, for a majority of people, the internet is a safe space. And a lot of it is about how we use it, how young people use the internet in a safe way to protect themselves, to avoid contact with some of those individuals who might want to groom and abuse. And I've talked a lot already about grooming, abuse, exploitation. But we can't lose sight of the other risks around the internet use and things like cyberbullying. Okay, cyberbullying can have such a significant impact. Thinking back to that point I made about it invading the nighttime space, bullying, we know that bullying of any kind can be very, very distressing for children and young people. Cyberbullying follows them, it stays with them all of the time. It's popping up, their mobile phone is constantly buzzing and beeping with messages. Every time they go onto their profiles on social media, there will be comments or messages. It's something that's really difficult to get away from. And because the internet use is such part and parcel of young people's lives, it's not as easy as saying to a young person, well, just delete that app or take yourself off of that website or block that person. I remember a young person saying to me a few years ago when we were talking to her about, can you block these individuals? And she said, I can't, because if I block them, then I don't know what they're saying about me. And that's even worse. At least I can be prepared if I'm going into school and they've been writing horrible things about me the previous evening online. At least I know about it and can be prepared for it. And I thought that was really, really sad thing to hear a young person say. That they couldn't protect themselves, they couldn't block these individuals or take themselves off of certain sites because they needed to keep on top of what was being said about them. But I see it a lot, not just with cyberbullying, but with all forms of internet risk. So grooming, exploitation, abuse, and cyberbullying, where our safety plans for these young people involve removing mobile phones, removing tablets and laptops, turning off or restricting Wi-Fi access, removing mobile data. And I think sometimes for young people, that's not necessarily an effective safety plan. We need to think the impact that can have on them. I think it can push the risk outside of the home and make young people more secretive. So I've known young people who've been groomed online who then have their devices removed from them, who will then go and use their friends' devices. They will use the internet on their friends' phones, but they'll be very secretive about it. And then if they're encountering difficulties, they're less likely to come to parents, carers or professionals to ask for help because they've been told, well, you shouldn't be on those sites anyway. But also it can make them very isolated. And young people who are experiencing who are being bullied online, so experiencing cyberbullying, as well as the bullying online, their support network will also be online. So the people who don't bully them, the friends that do stick up for them. So by telling them that they have to delete certain sites or taking away their mobile phones or limiting internet access, can just make that young person even more isolated. So I think we need to think very carefully about our safety plans. And also, are our safety plans victim blaming? Are we punishing a young person? Are we taking a punitive approach to a young person when they have been the victim? So a young person has been groomed, a young person has been exploited, a young person has been bullied online, and we punish them by removing their internet access. I know professionals don't approach it like that. They don't do it to purposely punish, but that's how it will feel for the young person. It's just something to think about. With all of these things, we also need to consider how some of the other dynamics of the internet, so the other things that getting tongue-tied, other impact that the internet can have, and social media. So things like self-esteem, not just with cyberbullying, but social media. A lot of social media nowadays, things like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat as well, with all of the filters, the photograph filters, they are all very much based on image and how somebody looks. I have a friend who, same age as me, I haven't seen her for many years. I've only seen her online on social media. I don't think I'd recognise her if I walked past her in the street, because she uses filters so much on her photos. I'm not sure what she actually looks like anymore. And there's a term, catfish, you may have heard of, talking about catfishing, where somebody is portraying the best version of themselves, or what they perceive as the best version of themselves online. And I think a lot of us will do that. You know, we'll scroll through pictures and go, yeah, that's the nicest one of me. That's the one that I'm going to put on my social media profile. But for young people and adults, it creates a real pressure. There's a real peer pressure. There's pressure around image. Then there's a risk of bullying. And bullying can come in different forms. So bullying could be somebody actually saying nasty things about your photograph, but also young people can be really affected by people not saying anything. Somebody posts a photograph online or a post online and nobody likes it. Nobody comments on it. They're not, or not as many people as they'd hoped. That can really affect a young person's self-esteem. They have certain expectations, and there are certain expectations when young people are online. And the norms and the social norms are dictated now very much by social media, how you look. So we're seeing an increase in young people with mental health problems, mental health difficulties, things like the low self-esteem, low self-confidence, depression, anxiety, things like self-harm, like eating disorders, you know, unhealthy weight loss, those sorts of things, as a result of that expectation of how you look and how you present online. In addition to young people presenting with some of those mental health problems, we've also got young people who will use the internet to get support and help. They will use the internet to seek advice and information. So, for example, if you have a young person who has an eating disorder, they are more likely to go onto the internet and search for information about eating disorders than they are to talk to somebody. They're more likely to look online than they are to approach an adult, a parent, a carer, a professional to talk about what's going on. And I think that creates additional challenges for all of us as professionals. it creates the challenge that we need to be more insightful. We need to be looking out for young people who are experiencing difficulties. We need to be looking out for signs and indicators for young people who've had changes of behaviour, because they may be less likely to come to us and ask for help. But I think we also need to be mindful that young people will use the internet to access information. And sometimes that information is not factual information. There is a lot of false news and false information and unhealthy and unsafe information online. There are also groups and forums for people experiencing the same difficulties or challenges. And some of them are really supportive groups, and some of them are quite dangerous. I've come across and worked with young people in the past who have come across websites they've been searching for information about an eating disorder, and they've come across a support group where actually you've got people who are encouraging each other. You know, they are sharing stories and information about how best to hide things from adults, what's the best way of making yourself sick, what's the best food to use when you're binging, things like that. Young people with drug or alcohol issues, there will be sites that talk about where you can obtain the cheapest drugs, and if you can't get hold of this, you should try this. So for all of the hundreds or thousands of fantastic, supportive, informative sites, there are some dangerous websites. And that then creates an additional vulnerability for a young person who is maybe at a very vulnerable stage anyway. I think as professionals, we need to consider that. We need to be talking to young people about who they're talking to, who they have spoken to, where they're getting their help from. Have they looked up any information online? And I always try to have a little sort of toolbox of resources, which includes lists of reputable websites that in your organisations, in your teams, with the work that you're doing directly with young people in your schools, in your GP surgeries, wherever it is that you work, thinking about what leaflets and posters can we have on display that signpost young people to reputable websites for their information. A young person is more likely going to sit in a GP surgery, for example, look at a poster and go on their phone and look at the website that is advertised on that poster. They are more likely to do that than to phone the helpline that's advertised on that poster, or to pick up a leaflet and read all of the information that's on that leaflet. They are so materials, promotional materials, publicity aimed at young people should be short and snappy. There should be something that's going to grab their attention, and then just very simply has a reputable website that can be that a young person can be guided to, so we can help them to navigate the internet and find helpful information rather than dangerous information. And just on an aside, I always think about toilets as well, not just generally, but think about what publicity, what materials you can put on the back of the toilet doors. You know, because sometimes I go into school reception areas and youth clubs and community centres and doctor surgeries, and there's fantastic displays with loads of really good posters and material and TV screens with like a slideshow coming up, and they're amazing. But if I'm encountering some kind of difficulty, am I going to look at that in that public space and get my phone out and start typing out the address while I'm sat there? Or if those things are mirrored on the back of toilet doors, for example, is that also a safe space where I'm more likely to get my phone out and take a picture of that poster, or jot down the the internet address. It's just something else to think about. So as professionals, as I said, helping young people to navigate the internet and signposting them to reputable sites can be really, really beneficial. Now, obviously, the past, 18 months? You lose track. It feels sometimes like 3 years it's been going on for. I'm sure for some of you it feels longer than others. But over the past 18 months, we've had this additional challenge with COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdowns, that internet use, social media use, the use of the use of different websites and apps has really become more popular than ever. People, adults and young people, using the internet to alleviate boredom, to stay in contact with people, to reduce that isolation. And we encouraged young people to be online, didn't we? More and more information was available online. We were encouraging them to complete their education online. Children were having classes, lessons online. A lot of local authorities, Woking and West Berks, Reading included, all authorities really across the country, were providing some of our most vulnerable children and young people with increased internet access by ensuring that families had access to not just the internet, but laptops. So it really created a different dynamic and additional challenges for children and young people in their online activity. And as you can see from this slide here, the UNSPCC in a recent report said that since lockdown, Childline has seen an 11% increase in the number of counselling sessions to do with online sexual abuse. And the NSPCC helpline has had a 60% increase in contacts from people with concerns about children experiencing online sexual abuse. That's phenomenal. That's really, really significant. Children's services locally have seen an increase in things like grooming, sharing of images, and online sexual abuse since the start of the pandemic. Some young people have become more isolated because they've become more and more reliant on their online use. And I think that we are still at the very beginnings of unearthing some of these problems. So I think there will be some young people where the grooming has been taking place through the last few months, and over the next 6 months or so, more and more young people we will become aware of more and more young people where grooming, child sexual abuse, cyberbullying and things has been an issue for them during the lockdown period. So yeah, it's just something, another dynamic to think about, how much online activity and the different sites, the different websites, the different apps young people have got into since COVID-19. It was the impact of COVID that led to the launch of this inquiry. The APPG on social media and the UK Safer Internet Centre launched the inquiry, the selfie generation, and looking at what is it that's behind the rise of self-generated indecent images of children online. Now, I think we need to just be very careful, firstly, when we think about language and the language we use when we talk about selfies and self-generated indecent images. We need to be very, very mindful that young people are not complicit in their own abuse. Okay, so using the term self-generated or selfie implies consent. But if a child has been groomed to take that image of themselves, then that's not true consent. Okay? If they have taken an image of themselves and shared it, but they did not realise that the person they were sharing it with is not the person they thought they were, or they didn't realise that that would get shared further, that would get passed on to other individuals or posted on certain sites, then again, they are not complicit. A young person is not complicit in their own abuse. So I just wanted to raise that, because I think sometimes the language we use can be quite victim blaming, can imply consent and choice, and sometimes we're not very trauma informed in the language that we use. But as you can see, so they're looking at some of the data from this report, and you can Google this and get the full report. You type in the selfie generation APPG. More than 1 in 7 children aged between 11 and 18 have been asked to send self-generated images and sexual messages. 7% of 11 to 16-year-olds have been asked to share a naked or semi-naked image of themselves. And on average, 1 child per primary class, so it's not just teenagers, 1 child per primary class has been sent or shown a naked or semi-naked image online by an adult. Some quite worrying statistics, and I would argue that statistics only really tell us what we know. There will be a lot of hidden stuff as well. So it's likely that this issue is bigger than this data tells us. So yeah, selfies, self-generated images is part and parcel of young people's life. It has become the norm, okay? And for this particular inquiry, there was data from lots of different sources that indicated that exactly that self-generated images is now the new norm for young people. And that can be really alien to us as adults. We can think we wouldn't dream of doing that. You know, it's really bizarre. We can't comprehend that that's a thing. But again, going back to what I said at the beginning, this is part and parcel of young people's lives. They don't know any different. They have grown up with the internet. They have grown up with smartphones. They have grown up with having access to a camera in their pocket, to communicating with each other via photographs. You know, when I was younger, it was the sending your friend over across the room at the youth club to say, my mate fancies you. Now it's a completely different dynamic. It's sending somebody an image. And we're not just talking about nude images here. It could just be an image with filters. It could be a provocative image. But that's the way that young people will communicate, and will communicate their feelings towards others. That's how young people explore their sexuality as well. And their sexual development often takes place online and is taking place at an earlier age, because, again, you don't have to be of an age where you have the confidence to talk to somebody face to face and think, oh, I don't want to expose myself, I don't want to kiss them, I'm not ready to show them my body. Actually sitting in your bedroom or bathroom, and that's really key, because a majority of these self-generated images that are identified by police and as part of this inquiry are in bedrooms and bathrooms. A young person can sit in their bedroom or their bathroom with this sense of security, this sense of confidence and anonymity, because they are on their own in a room with just their phone in front of them. They can take that picture, they can doctor that picture, they can filter it, they can edit it, they can make it the best version of themselves. And then there is a confidence to send that image to somebody else. And as I said earlier, there's also the lack of the consequential thinking. So it's all about the here and now. It's about, I want to send a picture to that person, I'm going to send it. It's done and dusted within a matter of seconds or minutes. And then only afterwards do we see young people going, oh, what are they going to do with that image? I hope they don't show anybody else. Yeah, so it's something that, again, that we need to consider in our practice, but also within our guidance and our protocols. How do we respond to these things? And when we think about professional response, I just need to point out that images of young people, indecent images of children, being in possession of those images, sharing, copying, printing, it is illegal. And whilst I appreciate that as professionals, you are wanting to safeguard children and young people, and you are wanting to respond in a way that most effectively safeguards them, and you want to report concerns, you need to remember that all you do need to do is report it. Okay? Do not view any of those images. If you're working in a school and you're hearing rumours about an image circulating of a young person online, if all of the other pupils are talking about this image that's going around the school, you don't need to see it to prove that it's there. Okay, you do not need to view it. And I would suggest that if you viewed it accidentally, so somebody came up to you and said, oh, look, have you seen what's going around of that person, and put it in front of you, then you need to report that to your designated safeguarding lead, your manager, or whoever. Document that in some way just to protect yourself. You don't need to view those images. You do not need to print them to take to a professionals meeting or to show your colleagues or as evidence. You do not need to share them with anybody. And as I said, people do this, I know, because they think it's in the best interest of the child and they think they're acting appropriately. The amount of times that colleagues at Thames Valley Police say that somebody has contacted them and said there's some images of a young person circulating online, really worried, believe this child's being groomed and exploited. I've got copies of the image. Do you want me to email them to you? You don't have to do that. You just tell the police. You can report the safeguarding concern to Children's Services or the criminal offence to the police, and just tell people what's happened and what information you know. You do not need to share. You do not need to save it. You do not need to copy it. And as I said, you don't even need to view it. If you have been told there is an image circulating, you don't need to verify that image. You tell the police that you have heard that rumour that it's circulating, and you let them deal with it. And this is to protect yourself, first and foremost, but also to protect the young person. They don't need that image to be circulating any more than it has done already. And you don't know who has access to that printer. You don't know if you save it, whether somebody might be able to get that off of your computer. There's all manner of complexities. So you don't need to see it. You don't need to evidence it. You don't need to prove it's there. You just need to report it. Okay, hope everybody's all right with this. Education is key. Informal and formal education is key to keeping children and young people safe when they're online. There are people out there, as I've mentioned, that use the internet to groom, abuse, exploit, or bully children and young people. For those perpetrators who are technically capable, it gives them a massive opportunity, and they will from the safety of their own homes. It will provide them with a feeling of anonymity, a feeling of security, to sit in front of their computer at home and just fire off friend requests or messages to hundreds of different young people in the hope that somebody responds to them. And some of the biggest risks to young people are where they have accepted a friend request or a follower or a message from somebody that they don't know. And it's a big challenge because young people, going back to the point I made about self-esteem and confidence and image, it's about getting friends. I hate that word now. It doesn't mean what it meant when I was younger. You know, young people talk about friends and they're people that they've never ever met. It's people that they have no connections with. It's just somebody that they mutually follow on social media, but they want friends, likes, followers. If somebody shares their post, that's exciting. You know, a young person uploads an image and somebody shares it, they're like, oh wow, somebody shared it. A young person uploads a video of them dancing on TikTok and somebody shares it, they're like, oh yeah, someone really liked it, they shared it. And actually, they don't know who it is that is sharing it. They don't know for what purpose it's being shared. So huge risks to young people, but a lot of the risks are based on how that young person might use the internet and how they might aim to keep themselves safe. And then things happen, but we need to remind young people that it's never too late to report something. That's something I feel really strongly about. I always say it's never too late to stop. So a young person may have been chatting to somebody online. They may have been having increasingly sexualized conversations with somebody online. They may have even shared some images of themselves with that person. They then find out that that person's not who they thought they were. They're really worried and it becomes quite scary and threatening. That young person needs to have the confidence to be able to report it. They need to know who they can report it to. And they need to know that they can do that without being judged, without recrimination, without us being punitive. You know, both us, and so some of this is education for parents as well, parents and carers. Some of you might be doing work directly with parents and carers and can support them in understanding how young people use the internet. We need to educate young people on recognising the risks, educate them on safety measures like privacy settings, knowing who it is they're talking to, understanding how to report concerns, who to report concerns to, that they can report concerns at any point, regardless of how far things may have gone. We need to educate young people on how to block worrying people. We need to educate and remind them that they shouldn't be meeting up with somebody offline that they've met online. And if they do arrange to meet somebody, they should be taking a trusted adult with them, not going alone and not going with another friend, because that's just putting two young people at risk. But you know, there are some genuine relationships and friendships that have developed online. And that's fine. If you are engaging your parent or carer in those discussions, you're talking to them openly about this friend that you've made that's got a common interest, that you want to meet up in real life, that your parent is agreeing and taking you along to meet them, that's all fantastic. We also need to educate young people on the law and the implications for them. So even for young people, and although the law's not set up to criminalise young people, but they need to recognise that somebody sends them a self-generated image and they choose to share that, if they choose to show their friends or circulate it around school or post it on a website, that's an offence. They are committing an offence, much the same as I just said to you. As professionals, you need to handle that image very carefully and sensitively, because it is an offence. It is an indecent image of a child. As well as understanding the law around self-generated images, we need to educate both children, young people and adults on how to be good, I use the term community guardians, good friends, good neighbours, and some of that is educating them on the law as well. People are too quick, adults included, adults probably more so in some cases, are too quick to photograph things, post things online, copy things, share things, and generally gossip about stuff online. You know, I see it all the time on social media with people who say, anyone know what's going on down so-and-so street? The police are down there. But then you see all of these other people commenting and speculating and gossiping and sharing names and images, and it can be really distressing. It can traumatize people. It can re-traumatize people if they were part of that. An example, and I know it's a very difficult example to talk about, but an example is the tragic death of Ollie Stevens at the beginning of this year in Emma Green in Reading, where straight away messages were circulating online. Snapchat was absolutely alive with messages, with young people sharing messages about, have you heard what's happened? Did you hear who's done it? And then within 24 hours at least, messages sharing about who, well, less than 24 hours, it was immediate, messages sharing about who the perpetrators were, who they believed the perpetrators were. And then messages circulating that had supposedly been sent by some of these individual children, which then you end up with fabricated messages. You end up with people who have created false messages and false imagery, but we don't fact check. So there were things circulating saying that people had offered certain amounts of money and this, that, and the other. And nobody knew what's true and what's not. They didn't care. It was all being shared. Everything that came through Snapchat and social media at that time, everybody believed. And it creates really difficult situation for everybody involved. It creates a difficult situation for the friends and family of both Ollie Stevens and the other young people who were involved. It creates risk to individuals like family members, siblings. It jeopardizes or potentially jeopardizes any kind of impartial investigation. Now, there are legal implications to circulating photos and circulating names and things like that. So the legal consequences. It can also traumatize individuals. I have friends and family whose children were receiving those messages who knew nothing about it. Some quite young children who knew nothing about this, who were then exposed to very graphic content, who were then getting very frightened and upset about these things that they were hearing. And that can happen a lot. We've talked a lot about young people putting things online and the conversations they're having and the friends they're making. But there's also that unsolicited sharing of information, the stuff that is just sent through and circulated, and people get a buzz from passing on as widely as possible. And young people and children can be exposed to some quite horrific and difficult and traumatizing things, not just the situation in Emma Green, but during lockdown, there was a guy on TikTok, I think he was in America, but he took his own life live on TikTok. So he filmed himself and was sharing it live as he took his life, and that was circulating all over the place. And whilst the owners of TikTok and those technology companies are trying to shut that down, they can't keep up with the amount of people who are still sharing it. And so somebody is sat there quite innocently, you know, they're very careful. Their parents have put restrictions on what they can and can't look at online. They're very sensible about what they do and don't click on. And then suddenly they receive a Snapchat from a friend, and they open it up and they're exposed to something really horrific and distressing. So it's such a complex media. The internet and all of these different technologies are so complex with the things that young people encounter and having to deal with, that education, going back to the point I just made, education is really, really important. Education about the law, education about keeping it safe as possible, education about reporting concerns. And I think, as well as education, support. You know, having professionals, adults, family members, people that young people can turn to if they encounter difficulties online, that we can support them, that we can help them process some of the information. And I think also general education is a battle for us now, because young people will read things online. They will make their own minds up about things online. They will do their research and homework online, and then we're having to help them to tease out what's accurate and factual information and what's fake news and inaccurate information. A lot of information to throw at you, I know. Just a few more slides, and then we might have some time for a couple of questions. But I think as professionals, we need to think, when we're working with children and young people, when we're undertaking any kind of work or any kind of assessment, whether it's a statutory assessment or not, we need to know as much as possible about that child or young person, but how much do we truly know? How much do we actually know about their lived experience, what day-to-day life is like for them? We often will know about the child's, you know, about them as an individual, any medical needs, any emotional needs, development needs. We know about their personality, education. We may know about their home and family life. We often know about home conditions, family dynamics, that sort of genogram. This is the parents, this is the siblings, this is the grandparents, who's married and remarried and divorced, and we know all of those sorts of dynamics. We understand what school they go to, but what do we know about their peers and associates? I use the term peers and associates rather than friends, because as I said earlier, that word friends is very, very different nowadays. So I think it's the people that they are spending time with. That's the best way to describe it. Who are the people that they spend time with, whether that is close friends, whether that is just peers and people they hang around with, whether it is associates, whether it's older people, people who are a negative influence or a positive influence. What do we know about the people they spend time with? And what do we know about the places and spaces where they spend their time? And this includes online places and spaces and online peers and associates. You may have heard the term contextual safeguarding, and contextual safeguarding is exactly this. It is thinking, you know, we know a lot about, or we may know a lot, in our traditional child and family approach. So our child safeguarding approach focuses on the child and what's going on within the home, within parenting capacity. The contextual safeguarding approach says, how do we get to the root of the context? You know, what's the context of the risk? I had a young person's, not a young person, a professional say to me recently, they were doing their assessment and they said, I asked them about any risk to the young person in terms of things like exploitation. And they said, no, there's no risk really to this young person out in the community. They spend all of their time at home. They don't really have a wide network of friends. They go to school, they come home. And then she said, and they just spend most of their time upstairs on their computer. Like, okay, so what do we know about that child's lived experience? What do we know about their life online? You think they're safe because they're not out in the community. So they're not being groomed and exploited. They're not being drawn into county lines, criminal exploitation, or things, you know, antisocial behaviour, criminal activity out in the neighbourhoods where they live. But what about their online activity? Who are they talking to online? If they're spending all of their time at home on their computer, who is it they're talking to? And what online places and spaces are they going to? You know, what apps and websites are they using? So actually, this professional knew nothing about that child's lived experience, and they had based their risk assessment on the fact that the child was at home all of the time. So we need to start thinking more about the child in terms of their online space so that we can effectively safeguard them. And we also need to work together as professionals to address the context in which harm is taking place. So we can safeguard individual child by individual child. But imagine you had a child who was using a particular website and there was a particular user on that website who was trying to groom children. We find out about it, we safeguard this young person, we educate them, we block them from using that website. Great, they're now safe. But that user is still on that website and they're just going to move on to another young person and start trying to groom another young person or try to target another young person. So by addressing the context, we are aiming to safeguard all children and young people. So what we want to do is report the website or report the user, that particular user who is grooming those children. The same as if we became aware of an area in our local community where young people were being groomed, or places or spaces in our local community that were hotspots for antisocial behaviour or crime or drug use. We can safeguard individual child at a time by trying to stop them from attending those locations. But the most effective safeguard is to target the context and address the issues that are going on within that hotspot location, and therefore creating safety for all children and young people. So it's no different than something that's happening in our local community than addressing it if that child is online all of the time. We need to think about the context in which the harm and abuse and exploitation is taking place. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's really important that we as professionals are aware of signs and indicators, changes in young people's behaviour, because young people are less likely to come and talk to us and seek help. They are more likely to try and sort things out for themselves and seek information online, or just try and hide what's happened. And this ChildNet project was looking at the barriers to young people seeking help, and the biggest one is they're too embarrassed. And I think there'll be different types of embarrassment. So there's the embarrassment from the young person because maybe they have already had those conversations, they've been chatting to someone, they've been sharing images, and they're embarrassed that that they have done that, but there's also the embarrassment that they got it wrong. You know, the embarrassment that they weren't able to recognise that this individual was a bad individual who was grooming them. They are worried about what would happen next. And a majority of children who were worried about what would happen next said that they were worried that they would get into trouble. It goes back to the point I was making about us victim blaming, you know, and not being trauma informed, rather than saying, thank you so much for coming and telling me, don't worry about it, we will sort this out, you've done the right thing. Most parents and carers predominantly, most parents would say, well, what were you doing on that website anyway? Well, why were you talking to somebody that you shouldn't have been talking to? Well, how did you get yourself into that? Well, why did you send them those messages? Then they might take a deep breath, and then they might say, don't worry, we'll sort this out. But first and foremost, there's a punitive approach, worried that they are to blame, so that guilt and shame that they've brought this on themselves, that they're to blame. And the consequences of that as well. So it links in with the what would happen next, but also the fact that they're to blame, that most children who have reported concerns around internet use, something bad that's happened to them on the internet, said that there was a punitive approach. So their phone was taken off of them, or they were banned from going on certain websites, or they were forced to delete their profile on a site, or their internet access was limited. So again, rather than us looking to safeguard them and work with them and educate them and support them to ensure that this doesn't happen again, we're just trying to stop them from using that technology, which is quite unrealistic. They're fearful, and they also think that they could try and sort it out for themselves. I think probably because of all of these other reasons, they're thinking, I'd rather sort it out for myself than tell anyone and admit to anybody that this has happened. And just the last thing to say is, you may hear about the online safety bill. This is currently a draft bill, and the draft has been circulated for comments, and there's a lot of major organisations like Safer Internet UK, like the NSPCC, who have filed a response to the government about the draft online safety bill, saying that it's not broad enough, that it's not doing enough to tackle these issues. But in a nutshell, the online safety bill is it's about establishing new regulations to address illegal and harmful content online. So it's aimed at preventing harm to individuals, with the emphasis being the duty of care in relation to sort of illegal content and content that's harmful for children. And it's about putting that responsibility on the providers of the internet services. So it's very much aimed at those big organisations, the Facebooks, the other big companies, the big giants in the technology world, and putting the emphasis on them and what they can do. And some of it's well beyond my level of knowledge when it comes to sort of encryption and end-to-end users and how easy it is. So one of the examples is how easy it might be for somebody to be on one website which is quite secure and have privacy settings, but then move to a less secure site and share information with individuals. So for example, you could be chatting to somebody on a very secure site, but then you share your phone number with them, and next thing you're chatting on WhatsApp, which is encrypted, end-to-end encryption, so it's very private and there's no security measures on there. So some of it's technical stuff like that, how to prevent that that sort of transition and how to strengthen some of their security features. But as I said, it's in its draft form, and within the next 12 months, hopefully they will release the online safety bill, and we will see more happening from those technology giants. But that is only a small part of the solution, because it doesn't matter what safety things are put in place. It's about how people use the internet. It's about how people use these websites, and perpetrators will find ways around it, and children and young people always know more than we do. That's one thing we can guarantee. They will always know more than we do about how to get around certain restrictions and security features. But I just thought I'd let you know to watch this space with regards to the online safety bill. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've recorded this so you can watch it back if you wanted to. You can let your colleagues know about it. If you had some technical glitches and missed a bit, you can watch it. It will be posted on the YouTube channel. Something else that is on that YouTube channel is a narrated PowerPoint from myself, so a narrated presentation. I think it's about 45 minutes to an hour long, where I just talk in a little bit more detail about some of the common websites and technologies that are used by young people. So if you felt that you wanted to know a little bit more about Snapchat, for example, or social media in general, and we haven't talked much today about gaming sites and some of the risks associated with gaming or chat rooms, then there is a narrated PowerPoint. So it's like a little online presentation training course that you can have a look at, that you can access through that YouTube channel. And I've just put on here a couple of websites that I think are really, really good websites when it comes to internet safety information. The first one, thinkyouknow.co.uk. Got different sections aimed at children and young people of different ages, so it explains internet safety in age appropriate ways, all the way through from age 5 to 8 in sort of cartoon form, looking at there's cartoons about people wearing masks, as in you don't really know who you're talking to online. Then they're all the way up to like a cyber cafe type space for teenagers, but there's also sections on there for parents and carers and for professionals to advise on how to keep children and young people safe. And another site that I really, really love, and I tell a lot of people about, is the NSPCC Net Aware website. This is really good if you want to keep up with modern technology and the different apps and websites that children and young people are using. You can go onto the NetAware website, you can search for the name. So if you wanted to know about TikTok, you can click on you can type in TikTok, or you can scroll through the alphabet to the letter T, and you can look up TikTok, and it will tell you all about what it is, how it's used, any security features, any parental controls and settings, what young people are saying about the risks and benefits, and what professionals are saying about the risks and benefits. But the good thing about NetAware is sometimes you might have seen on a young person's phone, you've seen an app. So you know what the picture looks like, but you don't know the name of the app. So with NetAware, you can sit, if you've got the time, and you can scroll through and look at some of the pictures and go, oh yes, that's the one they've got on their phone. Click on it and find out a little bit more about it. So just some useful sites for further information around internet safety, if you'd find that useful. So, it's a lot of information, I know. I hope it wasn't too much information thrown at you all in one go. I hope it was informative. And it's just getting you to think a little bit differently about how we approach some of these issues. It's not as clear cut as saying to a young person, just don't use the internet. And I think the work that we're all doing nowadays to safeguard young people has to look differently. You know, it has to look different. We have to approach our work in a very different way. So we have to be mindful that safeguarding risks come from different places and come from online use now. So it's quite a different dynamic to what we may have been looking at 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I'm mindful of the time, and you all sat there very calmly listening to me talk at you. But Donna, maybe we've got time for 1 or 2 questions. Apologies if yours is not picked. It's not favoritism. As I said, we're going to try and scroll through. If there are any questions in the comments, I'll try and go through some of those at another time. But Donna, was there anything that stood out?
Marta has actually been monitoring the chat, so Marta has got the questions, but did you want to do them, Marta, or do you want me to cover them?
It's up to you. I mean, there is a couple of questions. Maybe someone was asking if you can share this presentation, Becky. So I'm guessing that can go out with the email where you ask all the other questions. There was one in regards to the narrated presentation that's on the YouTube channel, and we can maybe circulate the link to it, as you will not be able to see it publicly, as it's a private published presentation. So we can share that one. And maybe there were a couple that I know you covered them, but maybe you can, because they're a bit specific in regards to, I'm just going to read these out loud. Can you clarify what we should be doing when young people disclose specific groups in terms of reporting to partner agencies, for example, the police or CSC? Example, when you are made aware of a number of young people are participating in these groups are part of suicide pacts and so on. It happens quite frequently in mental health services.
Yes, thank you. Something that that I didn't talk about, but yes, we have seen in the media, haven't we? If you've not come across it locally, where you may have a group of individuals all on a particular site or a particular messenger group where there might be a suicide pact or something. That's a safeguarding issue. If you become aware of that, you need to be reporting that through to Children's Services with as much information as possible. So what is the website that they're using? Who are the names? So you may be working with one individual and you want to report the safeguarding concern for them, but also you need to give names of other people that you are aware have become involved. Don't delay in making those referrals. If you refer through to Children's Services, they will obviously then screen it with the police. There are things that Children's Services can do to report through to places like the IWF, the Internet Watch Foundation, because we need to come at it from different angles. So we would need a strategy meeting. We'd need to look at how do we immediately safeguard the individual children involved. Is there a need to target any particular persons of concern? So is there a leader of that group that needs some disruption activity rather than a safeguarding approach? So what's the police role in that? We also then need to look at the context, which might be the website or the chat room, and how we report that through. You can, the IWF, the Internet Watch Foundation, is also a place that you can report if you come across a website that you think is inappropriate. You might not know any children who are directly involved, but you might stumble across an inappropriate website, you can report it directly to the Internet Watch Foundation for them to investigate. I've just seen another message pop up about the use of parental control software for children, and I do want to respond to this because it's something that I feel quite strongly about, and I have to say that I own this. You know, I can't dictate to any of you, and you may have different views, but I think parental control software is really good for young children. And what that means is parental control software that can prevent pop-ups. You know, you don't want your 7-year-old child playing on their iPad and suddenly a pop-up comes up on a website that they can click on and it takes them off to something quite adult and inappropriate. So I think for young children, parental control software is good. I think putting too many restrictions on children and young people often just pushes the problem out of the home and they become much more secretive. So if you, for example, as a parent, you were saying to your child, you are not allowed Facebook. All of your other friends are on Facebook, but you're not allowed Facebook. If they want Facebook, they're going to get it. They're going to do it in secret. I'm speculating there because you know some children are really good and they obey their parents, but you know, by putting too many restrictions in place, I worry that it pushes it outside of the home. I worry that children then become very secretive about their internet use. And then what happens is if they do encounter a difficulty, firstly, we don't educate them as much because we think, well, they're not using those sites, so I don't need to tell them about them. But then if they encounter a difficulty, they're less likely to come to us to talk to us about that problem because they will be fearful that they're just going to get in trouble. And most parents will admit that their first response would be, well, why were you even on there? I told you not to use it. So sorry, I wanted to jump in there and just respond to that. Something that I feel quite passionately about. Marta, was there anything else before we finish? Maybe just one more point.
Yeah, there was another one. One sec. Is it illegal to produce indecent images if done so between young people and without any concerns of being pressured to send the image?
So technically, yes, an indecent image of a child. So if it's somebody under the age of 18 and it's a nude picture or an explicit picture in any way, then yes, it is technically an offence to produce, be in possession of, or distribute. Okay. However, as I mentioned earlier, the law is not set up to criminalise all young people. And so it would be looked at on an individual basis. If it is, in that example, to age appropriate, so same age, young people, it's consenting, there's no force, coerce, manipulation in any way, then they're very unlikely that they're going to be prosecuted. The law is not set up to do that. Thames Valley Police would not want to be doing that. What they would do is if it was somebody who was sending unsolicited pictures, so somebody who's taking inappropriate images of themselves and sending them to lots of young people, even if that was a young person who was sending the images of themselves, then it would be taken more seriously. And we have got some young people who will be working with the youth offending team for sexually inappropriate behaviours like that. But it's a bit of a complex, that it have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. The Sex Offences Act says it's an offence. The Children's Act says it's an offence to be in possession or to make, produce or distribute indecent images of children. But if it's a self-generated image shared by a child to another child, then it's about education and youth support rather than a punitive approach.
Sorry, can I just ask, because I did put that question on. So if if we came across those pictures purely because, you know, whatever reason, I work in a school and residential school and children's phones are checked. Would we report that to the police, social care, or who would we report it to, if anyone?
I think that would have to be a discussion with your designated lead and a case by case, because obviously children's services and the police, there's lots of age appropriate relationships as such, but I would maybe contact children's services and mention it to them, or speak to your, you've got various options. You can ask for advice from children's services, or speak to your police schools liaison officer or your police link and just ask for their advice, because they might want to just look into it further. The most important thing, it's not about targeting those individual children in a punitive way. The most important thing is keeping in control of that image. That's the most important thing that we would want to do, is make sure that we have an appropriate response so that that image doesn't get into the wrong hands. As I mentioned earlier, that permanence is really key, and losing control of those images is really key. So that would be the reason why you'd be making that referral, rather than a punitive approach to those children. So I hope that helps. We are bang on 11 o'clock, so we will make sure that we send you some information. Yes, I can PDF the presentation and send it out in an email to all of you, and we'll add some of those links into that email as well. And once we send that email, if you've got any comments about today's forum, we won't do a formal evaluation form, but if you've got any comments about how it went, any improvements or anything, that would be really helpful. Thank you all so much for joining, especially my auntie, who I'm glad I didn't see was online before I started that presentation. That would have been off-putting. Thank you all very much for joining, and have a good rest of your day.